The 5 Sebastopol geese arrived at the Newton Depot on a Thursday morning in April 1932, and the station master read the shipping manifest 3 times before he looked up at Clara Reed and asked her to confirm what he was reading. Sebastopol geese, Clara told him. 4 females and a gander. Shipped from a breeder in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The station master looked at the crate. Through the wooden slats, something white was visible, not the flat white of an ordinary goose, but a layered, curling, spiraling white, the feathers twisting on themselves like something from a different world entirely. He had been receiving freight at the Newton Depot for 19 years, and he had never seen anything like it. He stamped her paperwork and said nothing else, which Clara thought was the wisest possible response. She had been planning this purchase since December, when she read a paragraph in the National Poultry and Feather Trade Journal describing the Sebastopol goose as a European breed of commercial interest for its curled decorative feathers, selling to millinery supply houses in Chicago and New York at prices the journal characterized as exceptional. The breed was virtually unknown in the Midwest, perhaps a dozen breeders east of the Alleghenies. Clara had set the journal down on the kitchen table and thought for 10 minutes. Then she had written to 3 of the dozen breeders. 2 wrote back. 1 had birds available in spring. The county had opinions about this, as it had opinions about everything Clara Reed did. She was 29, single by her own stated preference, running 60 acres of Jasper County bottomland alone since her father died in 1930 and left a banknote she was still paying down by inches. The county found her situation variously admirable, concerning, and mysterious, depending on which neighbor was doing the finding. Clara's own understanding was simpler. She had watched her mother spend 32 years making decisions by permission, and had decided at 17 that she would not do the same. This was not a position she argued, it was a position she held. She loaded the crate with the depot boy's help. She was securing the tailgate when a man on the platform behind her said, without being asked, that he would put a strap through the corner loop on the left side if she handed it to him. She handed it to him. He secured it, tested it, stepped back. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with charcoal gray eyes that moved to the crate and what was visible inside it, the impossible white curling feathers, with the unhurried attention of someone who notices things accurately before commenting on them. He asked what breed. Sebastopol, she told him. European decorative goose. He looked at the feathers through the slats for a moment. Then he asked whether they all looked like that. The good specimens. These are good specimens. He nodded once, the way a person does when information has been received and correctly filed. He picked up his own freight, 2 large crates of mill hardware from the depot cart, and carried them to a dark green truck parked alongside hers without further comment. Eli Grant, he mentioned as he loaded his crates. He ran the Grant millwork out of Newton. Clara Reed. She drove home. She thought about the question he had asked on the drive, which was the right question. Not what are they, which was what everyone else would have asked, but whether they all looked like that, which was a question about quality differentiation. A person who asks about quality differentiation has done some thinking about production and value, even in a context they have never encountered before. She decided this was worth noting and did not examine it further than that. Before we find out what Clara does with 5 curly-feathered geese that nobody in Jasper County has ever seen, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This channel reaches people from all across the country, and we love knowing where our stories land. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. We have new stories every week. The geese settled into the south pasture within a week and immediately established themselves as the most opinionated livestock Clara had ever managed. The gander, a large, imperious bird who carried his curled feathers with the self-possession of an animal fully aware of his own extraordinariness, developed a strong territorial opinion about the gate to the laying flock pen and stationed himself at it daily. The four geese moved through the pasture grass in a group with the particular deliberate grace of birds that have no natural predators within their own self-assessment. They were healthy, well habituated, exactly what the Lancaster County breeder had described. Clara walked through the flock every morning before the rest of the day's work, learning their individual feather quality. Two of the geese had exceptionally tight spirals on the breast feathers, which would grade highest with a millinery buyer. The other two had good quality, but less consistent curling on the wings. She noted this in her ledger with the column headings she had devised: bird, date, feather grade, yield estimate. The county came to look. This was inevitable. Herb Alderman from the east property rode past the south pasture fence twice in 3 days before he stopped and leaned on the rail and said he had heard she had bought some kind of fancy European birds. She confirmed this. He looked at the gander, who was crossing the pasture with his curled feathers lifting slightly in the breeze, and said they looked like something had gone wrong with them. Nothing had gone wrong with them, she told him. He rode on, and she could see from his posture that he had already decided she had made a peculiar and probably expensive mistake. Martha Connell at the dry goods store said she had heard about the geese and that they sounded very unusual, in the tone Martha used when she meant unwise. Ruth Harmon, who was one of 3 women in the county Clara genuinely liked, came to the farm on a Sunday specifically to see them and stood at the pasture fence for 20 minutes watching them move through the grass, and said they were the most extraordinary thing she had ever seen on a farm, and that she hoped Clara knew what she was doing. Clara said she had done the arithmetic. Ruth said that was reassuring, though her expression was not entirely convinced. The laying flock, 50 Rhode Island Reds, eggs at 14 cents a dozen to the Newton pool, covered the banknote and operating costs and left very little else. It was a manageable situation without surplus, which was not the condition Clara intended to maintain. She had written to 2 Chicago millinery supply houses in March, Harmon and Webb on Wabash Avenue, and Sterling Feather Supply, specialists in decorative and novelty feathers. She described the breed, the feather grades, her projected spring yield, and enclosed 2 sample feathers from the transit crate. Both letters went on a Wednesday in April, 1 week after the geese arrived. Sebastopol geese molted naturally late spring, the feathers loosening from April through June. Clara collected shed feathers daily from the pasture and shelter bedding. Wet or dirty Sebastopol feathers lost their curl and could not be restored. She added a dry shelter in the first week of May. She also learned that the gander could be lightly plucked on the breast once the molt was underway. He expressed a firm opinion about this the first 3 times and diminishing opinions thereafter, tolerating it by May with the pragmatic resignation of an animal that has concluded the human is going to do it regardless. By the end of June, she had collected and sorted 4.5 ounces of grade A feathers, tight spiral, 6 inches or longer, clean and dry, and 2 ounces of grade B. She weighed them on the kitchen scale and packed them in separate cloth bags with labels in her careful handwriting. The first letter back from Chicago arrived in the 2nd week of June. It was from a Mr. Henry Harmon of Harmon and Webb, who wrote that the sample feathers she had enclosed were the finest domestic curly feathers he had handled in 15 years of the trade, that he had been sourcing Sebastopol feathers from a single French importer who had been unreliable since 1930, and that he was prepared to offer $8 per ounce for grade A material and $5 per ounce for grade B, with a standing order for whatever quantity she could supply through the year. $8 per ounce. Clara read the letter twice. She did the arithmetic she had already done in her head 4 months ago and confirmed it. 4.5 ounces at $8 was $36. 2 ounces at $5 was $10. $46 from the first partial season of a 5-bird founding flock. The banknote payment was $32 a month. She was not there yet, but she could see from here where there was, and it was considerably closer than it had been in December. She wrote back to Harmon and Webb that week to confirm the standing order and the pricing. She also wrote to Sterling Feather Supply to inform them she had established a primary buyer relationship and to ask whether they would be interested as a secondary account for any surplus above her primary commitment. Sterling wrote back within 10 days. Yes, same pricing, any quantity she could provide. She folded both letters into the tin box on the kitchen shelf, the box that held her father's death certificate, the banknote, and her own ledger records, and went out to check the flock. Eli Grant came by on a Tuesday in July. He was hauling timber from the Henderson lot, and the county road past her gate was the direct route. He stopped to ask whether her timber stand had been assessed recently and whether the Newton Yard's pricing was fair. She had not. He told her the market had moved in 18 months, and what the yard was paying in 1930 was not what 1932 would support. He gave her a number 30% higher. She would have it assessed. That was sensible. He looked at the geese moving in the south pasture behind her, the gander with his extraordinary curled feathers lifted slightly by the July wind, and did not say anything about them. He got back in his truck and drove on. She had the stand assessed. The agent confirmed Eli's number. She renegotiated with the Newton Yard. The timber income increased 28% the following quarter. She thought about this. About a man who had given her accurate information about her own timber value with no stake in what she did with it, and then driven away, with the same methodical attention she gave everything worth thinking about. He came back 3 weeks later, again on a Tuesday, and stayed for the coffee she offered. They talked about the timber market, the egg pool prices, the county road. He asked one question about the geese, flock expansion timeline, and projected yield. She told him 9 birds by spring, 12 ounces grade A annually. He did the arithmetic in his head. She could see him doing it, and said that was a significant income stream for the acreage. She agreed that it was going to be. He finished his coffee and handed back the cup and drove on. She went back to the feather sorting she had been doing when he arrived and thought about what it meant that a man could sit on her porch steps for 45 minutes and not once tell her what to do differently. We're halfway through this story, and we want to know, have you ever raised unusual poultry, heritage chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys, anything outside the ordinary backyard flock? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your reminder. New stories every week. The fall brought 2 more pairs from the Lancaster County breeder, 4 additional birds, well selected for feather quality, $40 total, which cleaned out what remained from the first Harmon and Webb check after the banknote payment. She was at 0 again with 9 Sebastopol geese and 2 established millinery accounts, and the particular quiet confidence of someone who understands the arithmetic of compound growth. The county's opinion had evolved by October. The geese were no longer called a mistake, but a success Clara was managing without a husband's guidance, which the concerning faction considered a different problem, but still a problem. Clara did not discuss her accounts with anyone outside the bank. Eli appeared in November to cut the first timber portion. He worked efficiently, left the cut area clean, and brought the correct payment to the house with no rounding, which she noted. He stayed for coffee. They talked about the timber stand, the Goose expansion, the county fair. He had a quality of attention she had begun to recognize. He listened without waiting for his turn, and responded to what she had actually said. This was rarer than it should have been. He asked that November why she had decided not to marry. She told him she had decided not to marry anyone who would expect her to make decisions by permission, and that she had not yet met anyone she believed would not expect that. He asked whether that was a category she had closed or a standard she was still applying. She looked at him for a longer moment and said she was still applying the standard. He finished his coffee and left, and she thought about the distinction he had drawn for 3 days afterward and decided the answer was probably yes. Spring came to Jasper County in 1933, and the flock moved through the new grass with the grace of birds in their correct environment. The gander had reached full size, 14 pounds of white curled feathers, and the 8 geese were coming into their second season with better feather quality than the first, as Clara had read was typical. By the end of May, she had 8 ounces of grade A and 4 ounces of grade B, shipped to Harmon and Webb. The check: $64 for grade A, $20 for grade B, $84 total. The banknote was $32, operating costs $41, $11 remaining, set aside toward the fall timber sale. She looked at the banknote balance, $193, down from $460, and thought about what 15 birds would produce in 2 years. The end of the note was visible from here. Not today, not this year, but visible, which was a different thing entirely from where she had stood in 1930. She wrote to a third Chicago millinery buyer in June, Whitmore & Sons on Wabash Avenue, who had been advertising for curly feather supply in the back of the trade journal for 2 years. She had been waiting until she had enough supply to justify a third account. She had enough now. Whitmore wrote back within the week with the same pricing as Harmon and Webb and a request for quarterly supply starting in the fall. 3 Chicago millinery accounts. 9 birds going to 12 in the fall, 12 to 15 by the following spring. Clara sat on the porch in the June evening and watched the gander walk the perimeter of the south pasture with the authority of an animal who knows the value of what he carries, and thought about a paragraph in a trade journal and the specific kind of knowledge that only matters if you act on it. Eli came by on a Tuesday in July. She had the feather sorting on the porch table, grade A in one muslin stack, grade B in another, white spiraling curls in the morning light, and he stopped at the steps and looked at it with the contained expression of a man seeing for the first time the full physical reality of what he had been hearing about for a year. He sat down and they talked, and somewhere in the middle of conversation about the fall sale and the Whitmore account, something shifted. The particular shift between two people who have been moving toward a thing and feel the ground change. He asked if she was entering the geese at the county fair. She was. The Jasper County Fair was the last week of August, and she had entered the gander in the waterfowl exhibition. Nobody on the judging committee had ever seen a Sebastopol goose, and she intended to let them. He would be there. Most of the county would be, she expected. He looked at her sideways with something that was almost a smile. That was probably true. He almost smiled. The county fair was the last week of August, 1933. Clara brought the gander and set him in the waterfowl exhibition pen. The head judge, Arthur Pell, stopped, conferred with his committee, came back to look again, and asked what breed this was. Sebastopol, Clara told him. European decorative goose, the feathers a genetic characteristic. Pell said he had never seen anything like it. The gander won the waterfowl exhibition. Several established exhibitors said a novelty bird had no business winning over a proper goose, within earshot of Clara, who thanked the judge and collected the ribbon and did not respond. Friday evening, the last full day of the fair, Eli found her at the fence by the livestock barn. The fair lights were coming up behind the midway, and the county had the loosened quality of people letting formality go at the end of a long week. He stood beside her. They had spoken briefly 3 times over the course of the week. This was different. He turned to face her with his hat in his hands and told her he had a question. She waited. He had been coming to her farm on Tuesdays for a year and a half. He had renegotiated her timber contract, cut her timber, drunk her coffee, sat on her porch steps and listened to her talk about feathers and accounts and the arithmetic of what she was building, and he intended to keep doing all of it and more. He would like to know if she would marry him, knowing everything she had told him about what she would and would not accommodate, and meaning that he had understood her. She looked at him in the August evening light, at the county fair where she had just won a ribbon with a bird the county had called impossible, with 3 Chicago millinery accounts and 9 geese and a banknote that was going to be paid in full by 1935 at the current trajectory. She thought about a man who had asked a year and a half ago whether the good specimens all looked like that, a man who had given her the correct timber value with no stake in her decision. A man who asked whether the standard she was applying was closed or still open, which was the right question to ask and the only question that mattered. Yes, she put it without ceremony, the way she put everything that mattered. He put his hat back on. He reached over and took her hand, and she let him. And the Jasper County Fair moved around them with all its noise and light, and the gander was in his crate with his blue ribbon and his complete indifference to public opinion, and the county was right there to see it, which was exactly as it should be. They were married in October at the Jasper County Courthouse with Ruth Harmon and Eli's foreman as witnesses. The county clerk recorded it efficiently, and they drove home with the Iowa sky going gold behind the timber stands. Eli moved his operation to the Reed farm in November. He ran timber and millwork. She ran geese and feathers. The accounts were separate because separate accountabilities produced better outcomes, and neither of them suggested changes to the other's operation. The feather drying and sorting room was built in December, a dedicated space off the south barn with a flat work surface and a ventilation system that kept the air moving without chilling the feathers. Eli built the frame, and she specified every dimension because she knew what the work required, and he knew she knew. The banknote, her father's original debt, was cleared in full in February of 1934. The bank officer, Harold, wrote, "Paid in full," with the deliberate care of a man who has watched someone work toward something for 4 years and wants to record the moment correctly. She thanked him and drove home. Henry Harmon came to the farm in May of 1934. He stood at the pasture fence watching 15 Sebastopol geese move through the May grass and said, without performance, that they were extraordinary birds. Clara agreed. He asked how she had known to start with them. She had read the right paragraph at the right time and done the arithmetic. That was usually how it worked, he told her, and more people should try it. Eli came and stood beside her while Harmon finished his notes, and she let him, the way she let him into most things, not because it was expected, but because she had chosen it, which is the only basis on which she would ever let anyone into anything. The May afternoon held them both. The gander crossed the pasture with his blue Jasper County Fair ribbon's memory on him, though the ribbon itself was in a box on the kitchen shelf, and the 15 geese moved through the grass with their impossible curled feathers catching the Iowa light. There is a particular satisfaction to knowing the right thing before everyone else knows it, and building something with that knowledge before the knowing becomes obvious. Clara Reed had been working toward that since she was 17. It looked like feathers, as it turned out, extraordinary, curling, $8 an ounce feathers that the whole county had called peculiar until the whole county revised its opinion. She had not needed them to revise it, but she had not minded watching. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Leave a comment below. Have you ever held a standard for yourself that most people around you didn't understand and found out you were right to hold it? Tell us. Your stories are what makes this community what it is. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll have a new story for you next week. Asterisk.